No one expected that a seemingly harmless family meeting would mark the beginning of a silent war filled with manipulation. In a modestly decorated living room, Rena Solis, the woman who had sacrificed nearly all her youth for her husband's family, sat across from Evelyn Cole, her cold and calculating mother-in-law, and Darian, her long unemployed husband, with a face full of feigned concern. They smiled, then delivered what seemed like a small suggestion. Starting next month, you should contribute half your salary to support the whole family. Everyone's struggling right now, aren't they? A wave of dizziness swept over Rena. She was the only one working, paying the rent, covering utilities, even buying medicine for her in-laws. And now they wanted more. They wanted her to keep being the living bank for a family that did nothing but make demands. But what they didn't know was that they had just ignited the slow-burning fury inside her. And this time, Rena wouldn't back down. Rena Solis had never liked family meetings. They weren't the kind of warm gatherings where people shared joy, talked about their day, or reminisced about old memories. In her in-laws' household, family meetings were when everyone gathered to make a decision, and the one always being targeted was her. That day, there was no rain, no sun, just a dull, overcast afternoon. The air felt thick, almost like a warning that something was about to happen. Rena had just finished her shift and hadn't even changed out of her office uniform when she got a message from her husband. "Mom says you should come home early. There's an urgent family meeting." She sat down a bit, surprised to see everyone already gathered. Her mother-in-law, Evelyn, her husband Darian, his younger brother Leo, and even Darian's aunt. All of them wore serious expressions, though they tried to appear friendly. Evelyn was the first to speak, her tone suspiciously gentle. "Rena, you know things haven't been easy for the family these past few years. You have a stable job now. Your husband and I talked. If you could help out a little more, it would really ease the burden for everyone." Rena frowned. Help out a little more? She was already paying the rent, covering all food and utility bills, and paying for her mother-in-law's medication. She had endured years of her husband doing nothing while spending money carelessly. "What exactly do you mean?" Rena asked bluntly, despite the tension thickening in the room. Darian jumped in, avoiding her gaze. "Mom's just asking if you could contribute half your salary each month. She'll manage it, divide it up for everyone. Help out Mom and Leo too." Rena let out a laugh. Not because it was funny, but because she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Half of my salary? After I've already paid for everything for the past 5 years? Are you people serious?" Evelyn's face tightened, her voice sharpening. "You shouldn't say that. As a daughter-in-law, you should care about the extended family. Everyone here is struggling. You're the only one with a stable job. If you truly love your husband, sharing shouldn't be a problem." Sharing. Rena nearly shot up from her seat. Images flashed through her mind, working overtime late into the night to pay for her mother-in-law's treatment, while Darian slept in until noon as she quietly made breakfast. Every time she suggested he find a job, Evelyn would defend him. "A man has his ups and downs. You need to be patient, that's what a good wife does." But today was different. Rena had had enough. And more than ever, she realized they didn't see her as a daughter-in-law, or even as family. They saw her as an endless wallet, a walking ATM. "No," she said firmly. Evelyn's eyes widened. Darian looked flustered. "What do you mean?" "I mean no. I won't give a single cent for this ridiculous family-sharing plan. I've carried this household long enough. This is a family, not a family-run business, and I'm not your sponsor." The room instantly froze. Murmurs of protest rose. Darian's aunt called her selfish. Leo scoffed. "Funny how you used to say you loved this family." But Rena didn't care anymore. She stood up, walked straight into the bedroom, and locked the door. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she stared at the drawer overflowing with bills. Electricity, water, medical expenses for her mother-in-law, even birthday gifts for Darian's niece, all paid by her. No one had ever asked if she was tired. No one had ever said thank you. She took a deep breath, grabbed her phone, and texted her closest friend, Nara, a financial lawyer. "I need help. My in-laws just asked me to hand over half my salary each month. I want to protect my legal rights. ASAP." Message sent. And in that moment, a quiet decision took root in her mind. Rena would no longer allow herself to be exploited, not for one more second. That night, Rena couldn't sleep. Even though she had shut her bedroom door and ignored the irritated whispers coming from the living room, her mind wouldn't rest. She tossed and turned, haunted by one thought. How could she stay in a place where she was treated like a financial tool? Around 2 a.m., she sat up, opened her laptop, and began reviewing every single expense from the past 5 years. Each figure felt like a small stab at her self-worth. Rent in her name, utilities her name, internet school fees for her niece, medication for her mother-in-law. Everything came from her salary account. And Darian, nothing, not a single employment contract signed in the last 3 years. Every time she asked him about work, he snapped, "Work is a man's business. Why are you stressing? Your paycheck still covers everything, doesn't it?" That's when Rena realized something. She had been conditioned to believe that taking care of everyone was her duty, that her sacrifices were simply expected. She remembered the early days of their marriage when she and Darian still lived alone in her small apartment. Back then, he had just lost his job, but kept insisting it was temporary. She believed him. When her mother-in-law fell ill, Rena suggested they move her in so she could care for her. From that point on, her apartment slowly transformed into a shared home for Darian's entire family. Over time, it became an unspoken rule that she would cover all the expenses, and she, out of love and fear of being labeled a selfish daughter-in-law, went along with it. But little by little, she began to feel like a tree being drained of all its sap. She worked from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., rushed through cold meals, then threw herself into housework. Meanwhile, Darian lay on the couch, scrolling through his phone, occasionally pretending to job hunt. She had tried reasoning with him, even begged him to find work again, but she was always met with a cold stare and the same line. "If you can work, then work. I'm focusing on my own projects." Projects. They were nothing more than meaningless investments in crypto NFT games or vague online startups that only ended up costing her tens of millions of dong. She remembered one night when her best friend Nara cried and asked, "Rena, what would you think of a man who lives like a guest in his wife's home and doesn't feel ashamed?" At the time, Rena had only offered a weak smile. "Maybe he's just going through a rough patch. I just need to be a little more patient." But today, after that so-called family meeting, that felt more like a shakedown, she couldn't say that anymore. In their eyes, she wasn't a person. She was a walking ATM that smiled, cooked, and served. The next morning, Rena quietly left the house early. She didn't want to eat breakfast with them, didn't want to hear another word from Evelyn or Darian. She arrived at her office earlier than usual and printed out her bank statements, utility bills, lease agreements, all the documents with her name on them. She knew these would be important if this marriage ended. While she worked, she kept her face neutral. But inside, her heart was burning. Not with rage this time, but with heartbreak. She had allowed herself to be disrespected for far too long. That afternoon, Darian showed up to pick her up from work, a rare gesture. But it wasn't out of love. It was another attempt to pressure her. He sat in the driver's seat, looked straight ahead, and said, "Mom says you should reconsider. If you refuse to give the money, she'll be really hurt. Everyone's disappointed in how selfish you're being." Rena looked at him and calmly asked, "And you? Are you disappointed in yourself for letting your wife support the entire family for 5 years?" Darian paused, then snapped, "Don't change the subject. You're just making things worse." She turned away silent. In that moment, her decision became clear. That night, she moved some of her belongings back into her old apartment, the one that used to be their private space before his family took over. She hired a locksmith to change the locks and asked Nara to stay with her for a few days. She knew Darian wouldn't let this go, and she was right. 3 days later, he showed up at the apartment in a fury, banging on the door and yelling that she was shaming the whole family. But when Nara stepped out with her phone recording and calmly said, "You are attempting to unlawfully enter private property. I've already called the police," Darian could only curse and storm off. Behind the door, Rena didn't cry. She wasn't scared. She just exhaled deeply and freely. For the first time in years, she had truly defended herself. Rena had never been one for confrontation. For years she chose patience, chose silence to keep the peace. But there are limits lines that once crossed turn silence from gentle endurance into surrender. And Rena, after everything was done, surrendering. After the incident where Darian pounded on her door and was stopped by her best friend Nara, Rena knew things wouldn't end there. She had triggered a red light for a family system that had survived by draining her dry, and now that system was angry. The next day she went to the bank during her lunch break. In her hand were a stack of documents, statements, rental agreements, pay stubs, and every piece of paperwork tied to her personal finances. She spoke to the bank clerk like a seasoned lawyer. "I need to verify every automatic transfer from my account over the past 6 months, especially any that I didn't authorize." The employee looked slightly surprised, but quickly complied. After 15 minutes, a printed report was placed in front of her. And just as she had suspected, there were 3 recurring transfers, millions of dong each month, going to an account under the name Darian Elson. She had never authorized them. Rena clenched her fist. Her blood boiled. This wasn't just exploitation, this was financial fraud. She asked immediately, "How could someone else link my account to an online banking system without an OTP?" The employee looked at her sympathetically. "If he had access to your email or ever held your phone, he might have seen the OTP and used it to connect an e-wallet or set up automatic deductions. Unfortunately, this has happened to other clients before." Rena stood up, her voice firm. "I want all those links terminated immediately, and I want to file an official complaint for financial fraud." She walked out of the bank, leaving stunned employees behind. She wasn't the kind of woman who'd let someone steal her money and get away with it with just an apology. Back home, she did something else. She filed requests to terminate all joint accounts and remove Darian's name from any shared service contracts. Electricity, water, internet. She had put everything under her name from the beginning. But since Darian had once had access to her automatic payment accounts, she now had to shut everything down. From now on, all invoices would go to her new personal email. That evening, as if he sensed something, Darian called. His voice was no longer gentle. "What the hell are you doing? Why can't I withdraw money? Are you trying to cut me off financially?" She didn't respond right away. She stared at the screen, realizing her heart was now strong enough to face his tone. After a few seconds of silence, she replied calmly, "I'm just protecting my money. Linking my account behind my back is illegal. I've already filed a report at the bank. Don't think I won't go all the way." Darian scoffed. "Rena, you've lost your damn mind. You're blowing this up over a little money." She gave a quiet laugh. "No, I'm reclaiming what's mine, and I won't stop." The very next morning, Darian showed up with his mother Evelyn to confront her. They stood at the door, ringing the bell non-stop. But this time, the door remained shut. Nara had helped her install a camera and smart lock system that allowed remote denial of entry. Through the speaker, she said clearly, "I don't accept unannounced visitors. Any financial or property-related requests can go through my lawyer." Evelyn shouted, "You ungrateful witch! You lived in our house, used our family name, and now you want to cut everything off." Rena didn't respond. She had no reason to explain. No one in that family had ever asked if she was okay, if she could keep going. They only demanded, imposed, and used her. Now they couldn't control her anymore, and that terrified them. She knew what would come next. They'd try to regain power. A few days later, a strange letter was delivered to her workplace. Inside was a signed divorce certificate, along with a note. "Thank you for removing yourself from Darian's life. The paperwork is complete." She froze for 3 seconds. Then, like a jolt of icy electricity, her clarity returned. She had never signed anything. She had never agreed to any official divorce. And this was clearly forged. There was no more doubt this family was doing everything they could to get rid of her, while keeping the assets, the accounts, and the benefits. Rena sat frozen on the chair after carefully reading every line of the fake divorce document. The blurry copy had a signature that resembled hers, but it wasn't hers. The date, the location, even the name of a certifying attorney, all looked official, if she weren't as clear-headed and meticulous as she was right now. There was no court hearing, no petition filed, no meeting between parties. Everything was a lie, and worse, they had already begun acting on that paper. That evening, she received a phone call from the bank. The staff member's voice said, "Sorry, Ms. Rena, we received a request to change the beneficiary on your savings account due to your divorce. Could you please confirm?" Rena froze. Who submitted that request? And who signed it? A man named Darian Elson. He submitted a copy of a notarized divorce certificate stating the account is joint property and needs to be redistributed. She gave a cold laugh. "We are not divorced. That document is a fake, and if the bank takes any action based on it, I will sue." There was a brief silence before the staff member replied gently, "We'll freeze that request immediately, don't worry, but I strongly recommend you get a lawyer. This seems pretty serious." She hung up. Her mind was a storm. Every move Darian and his family made was no longer just emotional manipulation. They were targeting her money, her assets, her future. There was no time to wait. Early the next morning, Rena went straight to a law office. She had chosen a sharp female attorney known for handling complicated marital disputes. Her name was Attorney Than, a quiet woman with a reputation for being cold steel in court. "I need to prove that this divorce paper is fake, and I want to countersue for document forgery and attempted asset theft," Rena said firmly, sliding the copy of the document across the desk. Attorney Than flipped through the pages, frowning. "This didn't go through any official court system. The seal is a sophisticated fake, but if we trace the file number, it'll unravel. You're certain you never signed anything related to divorce?" 100%. I haven't even officially mentioned divorce." "Then this isn't just civil fraud, it's criminal. They planned to use this to steal your assets, didn't they?" Rena nodded. Her hands were shaking not from fear, but from fury. That afternoon, a flurry of documents was sent out. A report for forged divorce papers, a request for the court to verify fraudulent legal records, a notice to the bank to freeze all transactions involving her account, except those done by her directly, and most importantly, a lawsuit against Darian Elson and Evelyn Elson for fraud impersonation and attempted asset appropriation. That night, Rena didn't sleep. But it wasn't anxiety keeping her up, it was focus. She rewrote her entire financial story. She listed every bill and every expense from the past 6 years. Rent payments, utilities, tuition for her brother-in-law, roof repairs for her mother-in-law's house, the motorbike she bought for Darian, even the extravagant birthday parties thrown by his family that she quietly paid for. She gathered it all and sent it to her attorney. 2 weeks later, the first court summons was delivered to Darian and his mother. Evelyn showed up at Rena's house, banging on the door in rage. "You dare drag your mother-in-law to court? Do you have no shame?" Rena didn't open the door. Through the security camera, she calmly replied, "You should say that to your son. I'm not suing you because you're my mother-in-law. I'm suing you because you broke the law." Darian had disappeared. He wasn't answering calls, but word got around that he was asking a friend who worked in a notary office to help correct the divorce papers to make them look more legitimate. Rena immediately forwarded that information to her attorney. Attorney Than wasn't backing down. "We're not just proving the papers are fake, we'll find out who helped create them. If a notary officer was involved, that's another criminal case." That morning, Rena looked at herself in the mirror. The woman she saw wasn't the meek, submissive girl who once washed dishes until 1 a.m. after in-law parties. She wasn't the woman who sent half her paycheck to a family that never said thank you. The woman in the mirror was a warrior with a heart that had once been exploited, but now knew how to rise. She would fight with the law with logic, with the sharp intelligence of a woman who was no longer afraid. 3 months since Rena uncovered the forged divorce paper. 3 months of tension stretched tight like a wire. Every week brought new filing statements taken and evidence slowly brought to light. One Monday morning, Attorney Than called Rena in urgently. "Hot news," the lawyer said bluntly. Her voice was as calm as always, but her eyes gleamed with something different. "Do you remember the notary friend Darian reached out to for help? He accepted money and is now under internal investigation. We have a recording of him talking on the phone. The Notary Council is meeting privately to revoke his license and forward the case to the prosecutor's office. Rena clenched her fists. That means we're about to get undeniable evidence. Exactly. And worse for them, we just gathered documents confirming that Darian knowingly made false declarations to the bank in an attempt to transfer ownership of assets. That's organized fraud. And his mother is involved too, since she was listed as the transferee. Rena closed her eyes. A strange emotion washed over her. Not joy, not satisfaction, but peace. Finally, someone was looking at the truth. Justice had begun to stir. 2 weeks later, the first hearing took place. Rena stood before the court, holding a thick folder of documents. Each paper told a part of her life. Each page was evidence against those who thought she would stay silent forever. Darian's lawyer tried to play the confusion and misunderstood procedures card. They claimed Darian believed Rena had verbally agreed to the divorce and didn't realize forging documents was wrong. Rena let out a soft laugh in court. She opened a recording app and played the audio. In it, Darian's voice was clear as he spoke to the notary. Just make it look close enough. She doesn't read documents thoroughly. Just sign something and it'll be fine. The courtroom went silent. The judge banged the gavel. The court will proceed with investigation into forgery of public documents and attempted asset appropriation. Days later, the media picked up the story. The Expanded Legal Review published an article. Young wife accuses husband of forging divorce to steal assets, shocking truth behind a toxic marriage. The online public began to speak out. People who once saw Rena as submissive, who watched her serve her in-laws, now looked at her differently. A woman who dared to stand up, not for money, but for dignity and justice. By the 5th month, the preliminary ruling came. The divorce certificate was declared null and void, legally invalid, and confirmed to be a forgery. Darian was prosecuted for document forgery and fraudulent declarations with intent to steal assets. He was fined, given a suspended sentence, and ordered to pay compensation for Rena's mental and reputational damage. Darian's mother, Evelyn Elson, received a formal warning and was required to issue a written public apology to Rena. All frozen assets were returned to Rena. She was granted full access to the savings account and sole ownership of the previously shared apartment. Upon hearing the verdict, Evelyn exploded. "You wicked woman! You've destroyed my whole family." Rena turned back, not shaking, not angry. She simply replied, "I didn't destroy anything. You buried yourselves with greed and lies. I'm just protecting what's rightfully mine." 1 month later, Rena moved out of the apartment she had once shared with Darian. She didn't take much, just a few personal belongings and a folder containing all the documents that won her case. She stood on the balcony of her new apartment. It was higher up, smaller, but quieter. A new life had begun. No more mother-in-law barking orders, no more baseless blame, no more nights spent alone in what was supposed to be a shared home. She exhaled deeply. It felt like the first real breath in years. The next day, she received an email from an international legal organization. "We read your story. We'd like to invite you to speak at a conference on women's rights and marital fraud in Singapore." She smiled. Who would have thought that a girl who once lived quietly, treated like a maid in her own home, could become a voice for countless other women? Not everyone knows how to love the right way. Not everyone knows how to value the woman beside them. But Rena now knew one thing for certain: when you stand up for what's right, the universe will never let you fight alone. The end of the story. Rena didn't just win legally. She triumphed in dignity and self-respect, and in proving that women are not shadows behind men. A toxic marriage ended, but a radiant life had only just begun.